Today, I'm going to talk about street lighting. And so in particular, I'm going to report the results of the first and what I think is still the only ever randomized experiment that studies the effect of street lighting on public safety. It's work that's joint with Ben Hansen at the University of Oregon and Jason Lerner and Lucy Parker at the University of Chicago Crime Lab. I also want to acknowledge generous support for the project from Arnold Ventures, as well as our partners in New York City government. So in general, there's three main ways that we can control crime, right? We can invest in police and prisons, and this is probably, at least to some extent, a necessary part of crime control. It's also an approach that tends to be pretty expensive. It's expensive fiscally. It's also expensive socially. We can also invest in social programs, and there's certainly many good social programs, but social programs are notoriously difficult to scale. It's usually hard to replicate that elusive special sauce, right? Like a charismatic leader or a programmatic model that's highly tailored to local needs. So what else can we do? Well, I want to argue that there's potentially at least a third way, and that is focusing on changing the physical and the built environment. And so maybe at first blush, this might not seem like a very exciting idea, particularly if you think of criminal offenders as a highly motivated bunch of people, right? Because why would seemingly small changes to the built environment, like something like street lighting, deter an offender who's truly committed, right, to committing a crime? But actually, there's a lot of evidence that offenders aren't always so motivated or thoughtful, and that many crimes are simply crimes of opportunity. And we know that offenders tend to be thinking of the next 10 minutes of their lives rather than the next 10 years, right? And so it might be the case that interventions that affect the here and now can have an outsized impact. And there's one other feature of the built environment that I think creates some optimism, and that's the fact that it's something that we know how to scale, right? If it works, then there isn't as much of a concern about what the special sauce is. And that's going to be something that I think is quite important in this space. Okay, so let's talk about street lighting. This is not a new idea. In fact, it was Ben Franklin, who's often credited with designing the first candlelight street light in the United States for Philadelphia in 1757. But the idea behind street lighting is even older than that. In fact, reasonably sophisticated systems of street lighting using oil lamps have been documented in antiquity as far back as the 4th century BC in the Greek city-state of Antioch. And so probably it's right that this is an idea that is as old as civilization itself. Now, we've had lighting in the field for not 10 years, not 100 years, but probably thousands and thousands of years. And yet to date, until this project came along, there haven't been any randomized experiments. Typically, the stuff that predates this, you have some kind of quasi-experiment where one community gets some lighting, and then there's some comparison community selected by researchers that didn't receive the lighting. And if you think about the process that, say, the FDA uses to approve a new medical treatment, it's probably hard to imagine the FDA saying, well, we have a quasi-experiment and we have two people, one of whom got the treatment and one of whom didn't. So let's go ahead and approve some treatment on that basis. And so under the premise that social science research should aspire, when possible, to be no less rigorous than medical research, my colleagues and I wanted to see if we could design a field experiment to test the efficacy of lighting. Okay, so let me tell you about the intervention, because the devil is always in the details, and that's probably especially true here. So this is an intervention that was rolled out in 2016, which incredibly is 5 years ago now, in the spring and the summer of 2016. And the setting for the experiment is public housing in New York City, where crime, despite some long declines in crime in New York City, public housing is a place where crime has been pretty sticky over the years. So for those of you who aren't terribly familiar with New York, or at least not the neighborhoods that have public housing, here's a sense for what these communities look like. Most of these communities are clusters of buildings that are inset from the street. They're arranged around green space. There's pathways through the community, and there's no commercial activity. There's no stores here. So that's an important feature of the environment. Overall, these communities don't look a whole lot different than a cluster of dorms on a college campus. So here's what a typical community looks like at ground level. You can see there's some benches. People are sitting on those benches by the entrance to a building. If you look closely, you can see that there's a couple of very dim yellow streetlights there. And they do provide a little bit of lighting at night, but they don't provide a lot of lighting. In particular, if you're a few yards away, these aren't going to be doing very much to light up the area. And so here's the type of lighting that the city moved in that we were able to study. So these are not normal streetlights that you're used to seeing. These are temporary lighting towers, the sort that you might see on a construction site at night. They're very, very bright. They're diesel powered. They make a little bit of noise. They turn on automatically at night. And so above all, these towers are just incredibly, incredibly noticeable. They're located all around these communities. You really can't miss them. And so this intervention is about improving lighting, but it's also about making those lighting improvements as salient as possible. And so some of the effects we're seeing could be due not just to the effect of ambient lighting itself, but also to what we might term a demonstration effect, that you're making these communities seem as though they're cared for. And so overall, what I think we would say is this is a tactical lighting intervention. It's not a permanent infrastructure upgrade. So in spring of 2016, the city rolled hundreds of these lighting towers into 40 public housing communities. The lighting towers didn't cover the entire community. They were placed in areas where the police department felt as though they would best promote public safety. This is an actual map of one of these communities where the light towers ended up being placed. And you can see the coverage is good, but not complete. Okay, so our analysis is going to focus mainly on so-called index crimes. So these are among the most serious crimes that we have. They're the best measured crimes. They drive the lion's share of the social cost of crime. You might be wondering, well, how do we deal with the fact that there might be spillovers here, right? That maybe these lighting towers just push crime around the corner. How can we study this? So here's what we do. We estimate the effects for the public housing campuses. That's the blue area on the slide. But we also estimate treatment effects for the campus plus a 2-block radius around the campus. So that's that red box that you see in that slide. And so these net treatment effects that include the campus plus this 2-block catchment area, we view those as giving us a very conservative estimate of the treatment effect because only the blue area is being treated, but we're going to look for evidence of crime reductions or crime changes in the red areas. Okay, so what do we find? Well, we find evidence of some pretty large reductions in crime in these communities. Around a 60% overall reduction in outdoor nighttime index crimes, but we're going to want to be conservative here and fold in those potential spillovers to that catchment area around the campus. And when we do that, we come up with an estimate that's around 36%. So we see that when you roll these light towers in, you get about a 36% reduction in outdoor nighttime index crimes. Now, a couple of other findings are worth noting. One is that we don't see the same kinds of impacts on lower level quality of life crimes. We're seeing the effects seem to concentrate in more serious offending. And second, and this is a really important point, we don't see any evidence that the lighting intervention increases arrests. So if anything, we actually see that arrests are declining by roughly the same amount as the major crimes. And this is important because a lot of observers have worried, well, you roll some lights in and maybe this is just going to increase police surveillance. It's going to end up widening the net of the criminal justice system, subject people to misdemeanor prosecution, which we just heard can be a not so good thing. And so we don't see anything like that happening. We see crime going down. We don't see arrests going up. So what do we make of the experiment? I want to make a few points to make sure I'm not overselling the findings. It's just one RCT. We should have more. So first, it's important to note that in these residential communities, outdoor nighttime crime is only a small slice of the overall serious crime problem. A lot of the serious crimes in these communities happen indoors, things like domestic violence. And so overall, 15% of crime in these communities happens outdoors and at night. So when we talk about a 36% reduction in outdoor nighttime crimes off of a base of 15%, we're thinking overall about a 5 or 6% reduction in crime in these communities. So, as always, right, not a panacea. These are important effects, but there's still crime in these communities after the lighting intervention was rolled out. Second, these are short-term impacts. We still don't know what the longer-term impacts are. And that's something that policymakers should definitely take heed of. And then finally, we need to think carefully about external validity here. So it's not clear that permanent lighting upgrades are going to have the same effect, right? They might not be as salient as these temporary light towers that have this very, very obvious footprint. So we don't know what the effects would be of a permanent infrastructure upgrade. So I think overall, to sort of sum this up, I think I'd say a few things. So first, this is sort of a proof of concept paper that says, tactical interventions using street lighting can be a way to control crime, especially over the summer in some high crime places, hotspots within a city. By providing light and signaling that a high crime neighborhood is being watched and cared for, this is an intervention that potentially empowers residents to reclaim the use of public space from those who might be up to no good. It's an intervention that might feel fairly scalable, both cost-wise and with respect to technical know-how. And I think that creates some optimism around an intervention like this. So thank you so much. I'm very pleased that this project is a part of this wonderful series.